I'm Alan Wardis, and this is Think Radio Presents Think Planet. My guest today is author and non-industrial farmer Joel Salatin. Salatin is the author of numerous books on the subject of what he calls emotionally, economically, and environmentally enhancing agriculture. The title of one of his books captures this message and philosophy particularly well. It's called, Folks, This Ain't Normal, A Farmer's Advice for Happier Hens, Healthier People, and a Better World. Some say Salatin may be the most famous farmer in the world, and the New York Times called him the high priest of the pasture. Others have a different view, naming Salatin the typhoid Mary of agriculture and an apparent starvation advocate, all because he refuses to medicate his animals. With trademark humor, Salatin describes himself as a Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer. Stick around because this conversation with Joel unpacks every single one of those unexpected words and gets at the heart of what makes this new revolution in agriculture he advocates so timely and so important.
Think Planet is made possible by support from the Western Colorado University School of Environment and Sustainability, empowering future change agents to foster ecologically resilient, economically sustainable, and socially just communities throughout the world.
Subscribe to Think Radio Presents on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on Think Radio Presents. Joel, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I know that everyone who's planning to attend the Western Colorado Food and Farm Forum this weekend in Montrose is really looking forward to your appearance, and so I was glad to have an opportunity to talk a little ahead of that. You know, in doing some research about you, and honestly, I've been a fan for years. So many people have. I've been involved in farming in one way or another throughout my life, but I came across this phrase that I'd never heard before, and I love it. It's a way that you have described yourself as a Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic farmer. I love that. It's the kind of thing that, just captures your personality in one go, I think. But if you would allow me, I would love to break that down. And I think it'll help us get at your work and what it is that makes you tick. So let's start by taking the first word in that list and the last word, Christian farmer. What does that mean to you?
Well, I developed this moniker in order to kind of tell people, don't put me in a box. And so what I find is that all of these, the Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, they all have merit and they all have some negatives. And, I am a Christian, but I'm chagrined that the mainline Christian community doesn't seem interested in, in earth stewardship. It's all about let's exploit it as fast as we can. And, we have the Sanctity of Life movement that's all about protecting the unborn, but nobody cares about what kind of food the unborn eats.
Good point.
After they're living. And so that's my problem there. And then the balance, I should say, the tension. And then the libertarian, I'm definitely a small governmenter. I think the federal government's probably about 90% bigger than it ought to be. So I do espouse the limited government kind of libertarian view, but I don't espouse the totally rugged individualistic view that says, we can be an island and I can do whatever I want to and it doesn't affect anybody else. The fact is that the commons, the air, soil, and water on which we all depend was here before we were here. Hopefully it'll be after we're gone, but we didn't put it here, and we own that in common. And so I'm a big believer in protecting the commons, and that's not something that you hear too much from the libertarian small government community.
No, that's true. And yet, farming itself has always depended on this sort of community commons kind of idea. So those two words really kind of go hand in hand. But I want to ask you, why do you think it's so hard for people who identify themselves as libertarians to understand that concept of the commons? This idea of protecting the commons and operating from the commons is part and parcel of farming, is it not? There's no such thing as an island farmer.
Actually, unfortunately, it's not. Otherwise, farming would not be creating a dead zone the size of Rhode Island in the Gulf of Mexico, and farming would not have depleted 3 to 5 feet of topsoil on our farm. The history of agriculture is, unfortunately, not all, but certainly a lot of it, is the history of depletion of commons, of depletion of natural resources, whether it's, overcutting of trees, overgrazing, over-tillage, soil loss, pollution of waterways. There is definitely an exploitive nature, an exploitive trajectory in agriculture, which is why many environmentalists, actually question, can we actually farm environmentally? Can we actually do this? And
what's your answer to that?
Is absolutely yes.
Yeah.
But we can't do it with the kind of short-sighted, exploitive, paradigm that we've used.
Well, that brings us then to the next word in your list, this moniker that you've created for yourself, which is capitalist. Because one of the reasons why people say it has to be exploitive is that's the only way you make any money. What's your answer to that idea?
Well, yeah. Well, my answer there, yes. We do need capital in order to innovate and bring technological progress to what we're doing. There's no question about that. However, making a profit and making a profit as fast as you can is not the be-all, end-all. And so what we've done is we have taken the environmental or the external costs of our profitability off the equation. Whether you call it unintended consequences, whether you call it ancillary costs, whatever it is, the point is that we have absolutely not captured the cost of erosion. We have not captured the cost of MRSA and C. diff that are superbugs that have been created by subtherapeutic feeding of antibiotics. We have not captured a lot of these things. And so that's why the environmentalist aspect, the ecological aspect, is mated up then with the capitalist aspect, as well as the libertarian aspect, that we can't just, we can't just do anything we want to or whatever we can do. It must be bounded by an ethical, moral dimension, or else we simply destroy our nest.
Right, and so farmers like yourself, and I would say there's a growing number of people who are embracing these kind of ideas, are sort of disproving the idea that we have to externalize these costs in order to feed people affordably. Would you agree with that? That there are farms like yours that are proving
Yes.
that model is not true?
Yes, absolutely. And as you mentioned, it's a growing body of farmers that are looking at natural principles and saying, well, how can we scale and how can we be efficient in production and simply productive? How can we do this and grow soil and protect the water and purify the air and all those sorts of things? And so, yes, there are absolutely more and more farmers actually doing this, and the principles are coming, more, not just adopted, but they're becoming more clear and more concise. The protocols for accomplishment are becoming more evident, and that's a great thing.
And does that mean that the scientists are getting involved and the researchers and really putting some hard data to what you're talking about?
Sure. Well, scientists are certainly, I would say, getting involved in soil development as much as any single aspect of this. It's amazing that of the billions of soil microorganisms, only 10% have been named. 90% of soil microorganisms have yet to be named. So they're almost, it's almost as big a frontier and available for naming as stars.
Oh my goodness!
In distant galaxies. So soil has certainly become a much more understood thing, as well as nutrition. How do we maintain nutrition? We have been for 50, 60 years interested only in production. How do we get more volume? And now we're beginning to realize that if we don't get nutrition with the volume, then we have sickness, we have nutrient deficiency, we have all sorts of mineral and vitamin and enzyme imbalances in the human in the body. And so it's not just about bushels, it's not just about pounds, it's also about nutrition. How do we do that? And so there's a growing body of stuff from the microbiome projects to tissue sampling in plants, the whole omega-3, omega-6, omega-9 ratios, the fatty acid profile. I mean, these things are all growing out of more and more scientific exploration in the biological aspects of the mechanics of energy, of biological energy conversion.
Is it too soon to say that is starting to look like a new green revolution, that we had the revolution that got more biomass out of our farmland, but are we on the verge of something that you could say we're about to get better food out of our land? Yeah,
well, it's a good question. The one thing that I do not do is I do not make predictions. Because I collect I collect prophecies. One of my favorites is the CEO of IBM in 1966 said the world market for computers was about 6.
Right.
But I have a whole file of these. I mean, it's amazing. So I don't know if we're on the brink of a revolution or not. I do know that I will say this, if we fully leveraged the information that we currently have and the technology we currently have, and a lot of that technology is I'm not talking about biochemistry and bioengineering. I'm talking about technology like the electric fence, water pipe, pond building, excavation, the whole permaculture, water hydration systems, the knowledge that we now have with mob grazing, a la, Alan Savory and his work through holistic management. I mean, there is a confluence of some really cool, biomimicry understanding along with infrastructure that allows us for the first time in human history to actually leverage the understanding that we have. And so the trick is not right now, I don't think the weak link is actually more understanding. The weak link is increased adoption of what we already know.
Well, that is a very interesting point. And let me rephrase the question. Let's not make a prediction out of it. I'm going to phrase it as a hope. I'm sort of hoping that what you just laid out is something that's on the doorstep, that we will make better use of what we know. But that, I think, brings me to the next word in your list. Before the last one, farmer, it's all about farming. But what is it that makes you include the word lunatic in this description of yourself?
Yeah, well, what a great question. So the reason I put lunatic in there was that as I've become, more and more experienced and more well-known in the farming community, it's become more and more evident to me how different we are. We don't make flashy buildings. We don't do artificial insemination for our cows. We don't have factory farm buildings. we don't have a lot of the things that farmers go with, when they talk about success. And I mean, we don't buy chemical fertilizers, we don't buy pesticides. Instead, we buy sawdust, we buy carbon, we do large scale composting. So I mean, it's not like we're not interested in fertility, or we're not interested in health or all that. We're just trying to create a habitat in which we don't need a veterinarian, and we don't need a chemical input, we don't need a pharmaceutical. Our animals don't do drugs, and I've gotten significant pushback. I mean, there are plenty of people who think that I'm a menace to society, that if more people did what we did, people would starve to death because we can't produce enough food. If people did what we did, more animals would get sick because they're not immunized with vaccinations. If more people did what we did, we'd have the spread of avian influenza because our birds commiserate with the red-winged blackbirds, which we all know are sick because they're not on drugs. I mean, there's a million reasons out there for the orthodoxy, the industrial orthodoxy, to push back. And I feel that I've been called all sorts of names. I've been called Typhoid Mary, a bioterrorist, those kinds of things. And I can either get angry about it and upset, or I decided to say, yep, that's right. I'm the weirdo, I'm the lunatic. And if you read business books, you know that innovation always comes from the lunatic fringe. That's what they call it, the lunatic fringe. That's where innovation comes from. So it's a little bit of gotcha. Yeah, you can say I'm weird, but weirdness is what always brings innovation. And the next wave, you guys, you're gonna be left behind, because the new wave is on this lunatic fringe, this innovation fringe. So it's a bit of a way to smilingly deal with the pushback, and a way to kind of poke and say, gotcha.
Well, that's awesome, and it reminds me of the movie now it just jumped out of my mind. I'm gonna have to think about it. It reminds me of the movie Field of Dreams. This idea, if you just build it, they will come. Do you feel like that's what your operation is about? You're just doing it on a daily basis. Who cares what they say about you? And prove it up.
Well, yes, and a lot of people don't realize how peer-dependent farmers are. I mean, farmers are, goodness, we're only half the population of prisoners today in America, and so we're a pretty small fraternity, and it gets lonely out here. You're out here with your tractor, you're out here in the field, you're out here with your plants, your animals, and it's pretty lonely. And so the very small farming community in the country actually becomes more insular. That's what happens. And so farmers are extremely peer dependent. They're very concerned about what does my farming neighbor think. Mm-hmm. And so I appreciate, Field of Dreams. We just go on about what we're doing, and we love our farmer neighbors. We get along great, but we have a completely different worldview of health, production, ecology, and long-term sustainability. And so we just go on about our business. And fortunately, I'm not very peer dependent. And by definition, entrepreneurs can't be very peer dependent, because by definition, entrepreneurs are doing things that haven't been done before. And so yes, we just keep after it. And believe it or not, people, one at a time, say, well, that looks like it works pretty good. That's a neat idea, and gradually they come to it one at a time.
Yeah, and so your breakout book years ago was You Can Farm, and so you really do take it seriously to try to convince others that this can be done, and done well, profitably, and so forth. Why? After all these years of being on the lunatic fringe and taking all the heat, why are you still at this? Do you still feel that sort of missionary zeal to make this a new way of doing things?
I'm not sure I got the full question. Why do you still feel? Why am I still out there pushing on it? Is that the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat that then. Hopefully, you can hear the last part of it. Why? Have you devoted so much of your time and energy to convincing other people that this is the way to go?
Well, part of it is, I guess, I'm just a quintessential idea salesman, but the other part is very serious. That I do believe we don't have all the answers. I'm the first to admit that we don't have all the answers, and we don't do everything perfectly by any means. But I do know that farmers are looking for alternatives. Farmers are hurting. They're hurting in price. They're hurting in sustainability and succession. The kids don't want the farm, and so I am desperate to share our successes as well as our failures, but to share so that farmers can be inspired and empowered and encouraged. Some people call me the Farmer Evangelist. Even if you've had a bad day, when I'm done with you, you want to go back out there and go after it. And we need that. We need that in our churches. We need that in our farming as well. And so I don't make any apologies for continuing to encourage and inspire people to farm with nature, to have businesses that are family friendly, child friendly, and successionally friendly, so that we can feed everybody and and have a worthwhile, a sacred mission in life. 80% statistically, 80% of Americans hate their jobs. 80%, and what I find is that many people would love to do something with a craft, with their hands, something physical, and something tactile and visceral. I mean, that's the point of dirty jobs, right? And yet, we're told that if you don't sit behind a computer, society kind of puts you in a margin and doesn't respect you. And I want to bring respect and sacredness back to this wonderful vocation of landscape stewardship.
Well, and there was a time when that statistic was reversed. 80% of Americans were working on farms, family farms all over the country, correct?
Yes. Well, the Jeffersonian, intellectual agrarian was very much a part of our country's founding.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's finish up by coming back to the very first word that I asked you about, and that was Christian, libertarian, environmentalist, capitalist, lunatic, farmer. We kind of brushed by that, and you said you're dismayed that the faith community doesn't embrace some of these ideas more readily. It seems a good fit. But let's take that word back out for a second, and I want to ask you, in what ways your personal faith has determined and defined the kind of farmer that you are, with your ethic for the land and for the animals and so forth?
Yeah, that's such a wonderful question, and thank you for asking it. Yes, my personal faith says I don't own the land. I mean, the courthouse says I own the land, but I don't actually own it. I borrow it from my grandchildren, from future generations, and God actually owns it. So my question is, well, then if God actually owns it, what would he like me to do with his possession? I mean, just like if you had fiduciary responsibilities for somebody that you're managing their investment fund. And so does it give God a good return on investment if I leave him a polluted river, if I leave him no soil, if I leave him a rock patch instead of a fertile field? Does it give him good return if I leave him chickens that don't have an immune system, or that give people sicknesses and disease? And so those are the questions that I ask. And in addition to that, then it's also is what I believe in the pew, sitting in the church, the pew, what is showing up on my menu. Is the food that I'm producing, is it neighbor friendly? Neighbor friendly means I don't stink up the neighborhood. I don't encourage flooding. I don't encourage desertification, dryness. These kinds of things are the questions that I ask, and so I wrestle with those. And again, I don't have cut and dried answers, but I do think in the faith community we must indeed wrestle with these things in order to ask, what would God want me to do in this situation?
And we're going to philosophical depths here, I understand. But in your experience with your own faith and working with others of faith, why do you think there has developed this disconnect between faith and stewardship, as you describe it?
Well, I think on the surface, the quick answer is that the disconnect has not always been there. If you read very early, Christian and church writers, you don't find this level of disconnect. And I think a lot of the disconnect has grown since, for the last 1,000 years perhaps, as the kind of environmental movement, if you will, took a creation worship, a Gaia kind of view toward ecology, and the Christian community, is repelled by that. They just find that reprehensible, and the tendency is to just throw out the baby with the bathwater and say, if you're gonna talk about Mother Nature and you're gonna take God out of creation and blah blah blah, well then we don't. We want to be exactly the opposite. We want to use it as fast as we can. We want to exploit it as much as we can. So you have that aspect, as well as the fact that think about the things that have been done in the name of God. I mean, the conquistadors, killed all the Incas in the name of God, and so there's been a tremendous amount of tragedy and evil done in the name of God, and so I want to point out that is not biblical. That is an incorrect interpretation, incorrect understanding of our mandates as God's hands and feet on the earth.
And so when you look out at the social, national landscape, even global, are there any things that you could point to here at the end of our conversation that particularly give you hope?
Yes, in the national landscape, the hope. Yes, well, certainly the whole local food movement has been good for people to try to connect their microbiome with the earthworms in the field. I mean, that's an ultimate connection, and there is absolutely an increasing desire for that. Last night, I did a guest appearance at one of our restaurants in Washington, D.C., and they had a whole standing room only room full of people there that came and ate our food from the restaurant and then wanted to hear, how do you farm what we just ate, how do you raise it, that sort of thing. And so there's absolutely an increasing interest in that level of connection, and I'm very, very excited about that. I'm also very excited about the millennial idea of caring. I mean, now when I go speak at a college, sometimes more often than you'd be surprised to know, they'll say, "Well, could you come an hour early? The students have prepared some dishes from their CSAs and their little backyard gardens, and want to share a potluck, before you do your lecture." And I can tell you, when I was in college, that would not have happened.
That's true.
And so that level of caring about our food system, about our farm system, there is a very, very increasing level of caring, and that's very exciting.
Well, I'm going to go back to my expression of hope that maybe we are on the verge of a new green revolution and that it will be driven by these human changes that you're talking about. Joel, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a real delight and a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think Planet.